follow the signs. Kimberly.
How do you know my name?
If you've seen the Final Destination movies before, you know that some of the best parts of these flicks are when William Bloodworth shows up on screen to briefly give some crazy advice. His short appearances in the first two flicks are special and mysterious, while his absence is felt in the next two installments. Tony Todd does voice Satan outside of the Devil's Flight roller coaster in the third movie, however.
You can run, but you cannot hide.
He's featured a lot more in the fifth film, as he should be, and now the character returns for the last time in Bloodlines. Will William Bloodworth's final appearance in Final Destination finally give us a backstory for the character, and will it confirm an otherworldly fan theory? Well, let's get into it. Hey everybody, I'm Killjoy Jake, and I'm definitely not milking the Final Destination Bloodlines hype. What are you talking about? Anyways, I'll be doing in-depth reviews this month for all 5 of the existing Final Destination movies, and possibly posting more theory videos just like this one. Today's theory centers on William Bloodworth, a character many fans are excited to see in this upcoming installment. With the character being absent from 2 of the 6 films and Tony Todd's unfortunate recent passing, it's certainly going to make for a memorable and maybe even sad sequence. Now, it's been rumored that Bloodlines will finally dive into the character's backstory and explain how he knows so much about Death's design. Before we talk about the future for this character, let's first examine his past appearances. Ol' Willie here is first introduced as a coroner handling the bodies that drop in the first film. Alex Browning and Clear Rivers sneak into his morgue to get a look at Todd Wagner. Wagner here is of course the first character to get Final Destination by slipping in the bathroom and getting a shower line wrapped around his neck. Bloodworth catches them sneaking around but doesn't immediately kick them out. Instead, he seems to know a lot about their very specific supernatural situation. Here he basically tells our characters what the fans already know. If you cheat death, you'll be visited by him once more. Ooh. He even explains the concept of Death's List and how tampering with it can lead to dire consequences. And although these characters from the first movie run with this plan, they all still end up dead. Whether it's from one of the big sequences in the first film, a stupid off-screen brick falling from a building, or by helping the next set of survivors in the sequel, everyone who survived the Flight 180 explosion was eventually killed. Clear Rivers would revisit Bloodworth one more time before her explosive death in Final Destination 2, though. This scene goes a little differently than the one in the first movie. Bloodworth explains this time that new life can defeat death. I don't know about all of you, but if I was Clear Rivers in this situation, I would be furious with Bloodworth right now. Like, you couldn't have told us that before all of my friends died and my boyfriend? Because William's advice is yet again very vague, our characters misconstrue it. Kimberly and Thomas deduce that the pregnant lady that survived the crash is their last hope, and that if she successfully gives birth to a new life, Death's List will skip the remaining survivors. It turns out that these characters actually have to die and then be resuscitated in order to have a new life. And this kinda works. Kimberly and Thomas end up surviving the events of the sequel, unlike that kid who explodes at the barbecue, even though they supposedly die in a wood chipper 5 years later. We talked about that potentially canon, potentially not canon detail in a previous theory video. Bloodworth wouldn't appear in the next 2 movies in this franchise. Tony Todd was supposed to reprise the role in the 4th movie, The Final Destination, but couldn't due to a scheduling conflict. He opted to be in the Transformers sequel as one of the bad guys instead, which may have been the right move. Tony only lended his voice for the 3rd film, which I think is crazy. Why not do a quick Bloodworth scene in that 3rd film to explain how Death's design is different this time around? Which it is. My best guess here is that director James Wong wanted Final Destination 3 to be a departure from what had come before in this series. Wong returned to direct the film after an absence from the sequel. He seemed pretty critical of that second film too, utilizing characters that were all connected to Flight 180. He argued that it would be scarier if the premonitions could just happen to anybody. That's reflected in a few elements of FD3, like a change in aspect ratio, characters that hardly have any ties to the cast of the original 2 films, and a much more modern tone. I totally agree with James here about the premonitions, but like, dude, Tony Todd should have been on screen in this flick. If there's anything that should be consistent across every movie in this series, it's him. Thankfully, 2 years later, Bloodworth would get the biggest role he ever had in this series thus far, in Final Destination 5. Although the character essentially serves the same purpose here, he shows up after some of the characters die to pick up their bodies. He is a coroner after all.
Who are you? What are you doing?
my job.
I have no complaints on the extra screen time with that one. Another thing that makes his addition to Final Destination 5 significant is that he offers up his most sinister advice yet. Bloodworth tells our prequel characters that by taking a life, they will receive the lifespan of the person they've killed. This results in a vicious third act where a deranged Peter, played by Tom Cruise lookalike Miles Fisher, goes on a Patrick Bateman-style killing spree through the kitchen of a nice restaurant. I guess he never had those Dorsia reservations after all. Our lead, Sam, here stabs him thinking he just took his lifespan, but then tragically explodes with his girlfriend on Flight 180. It might be the most gut-wrenching twist ending to a franchise continuation I have ever seen, and it's a true reminder that none of us can escape death. Bloodworth briefly appears in the novel Final Destination: Death of the Senses that follows the bus driver that killed Terry Chaney in the original film. That dude has his own premonition and everything after he was fired because of, well, what obviously happened with Terry. William's scene in the novel is essentially a glorified cameo. He tells former bus driver Jack Curtis to watch for the signs, seemingly knowing more than he's letting on. With all of that in mind, Bloodworth's advice is pretty fucking terrible. He never fully explains what our characters must do to survive unless it's literally killing each other, and he almost never gives advice that actually saves our main players. I guess the creepy coroner guy who literally has the word blood in his last name was a bad guy after all. Because of this, one of the most popular Final Destination theories out there is that Tony Todd is the Grim Reaper disguised as a simple coroner this entire time. Considering his seemingly evil intentions and ominous demeanor, does this theory actually hold some weight, and could it be explained in the upcoming movie this May? I think maybe yes. But once again, I want to turn to the tie-in novels that may offer up some more clues. Death appears in multiple novels, and we've already detailed his crucial scenes from Looks Could Kill in my previous theory video. In the novel Dead Reckoning, Death is suggested to be a shifting conglomerate of corpses, and in the comic Final Destination Spring Break, the entity is shown as a pillar of smoke with glowing eyes and demon horns. The most interesting detail from this Spring Break comic, however, is that it sort of redefines the Final Destination lore entirely. A few quotes used in the comic are "Life is pleasant, death is peaceful. It's the transition that's troublesome" from Francis Bacon, and one from Henry Fielding that goes, "It hath been often said that it is not death but dying which is terrible." This makes it seem like the Grim Reaper is less of a Jason Voorhees style slasher going after people that escaped death, but rather an entity that places characters in unique positions to die. Doesn't that sound a lot like William Bloodworth? Our heroes in these stories never seem to get a hostile vibe from Bloodworth, even though he does seem strange and all-knowing. He never attempts to kill anyone in the franchise, but he does give our characters who are in dire situations pretty terrible advice that usually leads to their deaths. And maybe the most damning detail so far that Bloodlines is clearly going to deal with this yet again is that the only thing we've seen from William Bloodworth in the trailer so far is him clearly giving our characters a new set of rules.
Only by embracing death will it pass you by.
What does that mean, Bill? So will Bloodlines explain that about the character without somehow shattering the mystique? Well, I kinda hope not. Whether you think he's a cosmic soul collector or not, he's always been a character that's unaffected by what's happening in the main story, yet seems to know everything about it. I think that's the best utilization of the character. Explaining too much about him would ruin what makes him so great. Maybe he is the Grim Reaper, or maybe he's not. I think it's better that we just never open up that Schrodinger's box to keep these movies fun and simple. Trust me, I think it's a blast making these videos and finding potential evidence that supports the wildest theories out there, but the truth is some stones are better left unturned. This character's whole thing is being mysterious. Why take that away from him? I do hope that this film finds a way to honor Mr. Todd after his unfortunate passing this past November. If Bloodlines decides to do that by retiring the character and just explaining everything about him, who am I to complain about that? After all, it's not the first time something like this has really worked for the guy.
Be my victim.
Whatever ends up happening here, I'm just so grateful that we have at least one more Tony Todd performance. I know it's going to be great. Rest in power to an absolute horror legend. Hey everybody, before we wrap up today's video, please make sure to subscribe for more wild horror theories just like this. The goal this year is to hit 40,000 subs, and we're currently on track to do so. Thank you to everyone who's already subscribed. Also, check out my gaming channel GullGotha for some goofy horror gaming videos. One last thing, and I promise I'll shut up. If you haven't seen my short film Chicken Man yet, it, I recommend you do so. We have a ton of new people on the channel, so if you have like 10 minutes, check out my slasher short that I'm hoping to make into a feature one day. The link for all of these things are in the description of this video. So what purpose do you think William Bloodworth will serve here in Bloodlines, and do you think he's the Grim Reaper? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you all again for watching, please subscribe, and as always, don't forget to kill it out there, y'all.